The dawn breaks over Cairo like a promise being kept soft, uncertain, and ultimately fragile. The sun spills liquid gold across the Nile, turning the water into molten amber that ripples beneath the hull of the Cleopatra's Crown, a luxury river steamer of the old European elegance. Polished teak railings gleam. White linen awnings snap gently in the morning breeze. From the upper deck, the city sprawls behind them, minarets and noise fading into the crystalline Egyptian air. Hercule Poirot stands at the bow, his diminutive frame perfectly composed, his mustache that legendary, immaculate crescent of vanity catching the early light like a work of art. He wears a cream-colored suit that seems impossible in the Cairo heat, not a thread out of place. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, reflect the water below. He is precisely 63 years old, though time seems to have negotiated a private treaty with him, touching him only lightly. His eyes are small, sharp, and missing nothing, formidable. He murmurs to himself in French, watching the river unfold before him. The Nile, she does not rush. She flows with the certainty of one who understands that hurrying is the privilege of the anxious. Behind him, the ship stirs to life. Porters carry leather trunks and steamer cases up the gangway. Aristocrats and millionaires exchange greetings in that particular tone of voice reserved for those who have always had money, a kind of linguistic understatement that conceals more than it reveals. An orchestra tuner works on the baby grand piano in the main salon. Flower arrangements, orchids, roses, lilies are positioned with the precision of an army preparing for battle. Poirot has booked passage for 3 weeks. He has solved a case in Cairo involving a stolen Byzantine icon and a forged inheritance document, and he has decided to reward himself with leisure. He does not often indulge in leisure. The little Belgian detective understands that idleness is the province of the uninspired, and yet even he has come to appreciate that a mind, particularly one as meticulously organized as his own, requires occasionally to be fallow. The other passengers begin to materialize, like characters in an unfolding story. First, there is Lord Adrian Ashford, 68, with the face of a man who built an empire out of cotton and carried the weight of it, like distinguished luggage. His wife, Margaret, 20 years his junior, elegant and careful, the sort of woman whose smile never quite reaches her eyes. They have been married for 8 months. The ship's gossip, already rich and elaborate, suggests this is their second marriage to each other. They were married 27 years ago. They divorced. Lord Ashford married someone else. Margaret did not. And now, mysteriously, after her first husband's death and Lord Ashford's wife's departure for a younger man, they have remarried. There is something almost archaeological about it, a couple digging themselves out of the tomb of their separation. Then comes Victor Strand, 34, a financier with restless hands and the kind of smile that appears and disappears too quickly to fully trust. He watches Margaret Ashford with the intensity of a man reading a letter written in a code. He is determined to break. He is accompanied by his business associate, Edmund Price, who seems always to be slightly to Victor's left, like a shadow that has learned to speak. There's Miss Lucienne Gaston, a French pianist of moderate fame and genuine talent, traveling with her elderly aunt, Madame Berthe Gaston. Lucienne is 28, with black hair that falls like liquid midnight and fingers that seem to have been designed specifically for the arrangement of musical notes. She practices scales in her cabin with such precision that the other passengers can set their watches by her disciplined precision. And then there is the heiress. Catherine Verellen arrived last, descending from a private motorcar with the air of someone accustomed to the world, arranging itself around her according to her preferences. She is 29 years old, American, with red hair that seems almost deliberately striking, not natural, though it is difficult to say so with certainty, and a collection of jewelry that glitters with the accumulated weight of family fortune. Her father, the steel magnate Clarence Verellen, died 6 months ago and left her $2 million. She also inherited, indirectly, a lover. This lover is James Rutherford, 31, British, with the kind of bone structure that had once graced magazine covers before he discovered that modeling paid less well than attaching himself to wealthy women. He and Catherine appear together in the ship's salon, in the dining room, on the deck at dusk. They touch with a propriety that suggests they touch more liberally in private. But James is also, everyone notes, the former fiancé of Lucia and Gaston. And this small fact becomes the crucial detail, the grain of sand that will eventually become a pearl of such dark luster that no one aboard will ever forget its shape. Poirot observes all of this with the precision of a man who understands that human behavior is not random. It is a language. One need only learn to read it. He takes his aperitif on deck, watches the couples and the triangles and the careful negotiations of proximity. He notices the way Victor Strand's eye follows Margaret Ashford. He observes the tremor in Edmund Price's hand when James Rutherford passes. He sees how Lord Ashford drinks steadily through the evening, his jaw tightening imperceptibly each time his wife laughs. The Nile flows on, indifferent and eternal. And Hercule Poirot, that fastidious, vain, brilliant relic of a more elegant age, understands that he has not truly come here to rest. The universe does not often grant him that mercy. Somewhere on this ship, in these carefully packed trunks, and behind these carefully managed smiles, there is a secret so corrosive that it will eventually demand expression. And when it does, it will demand it in blood. The dining room of the Cleopatra's Crown is a study in controlled opulence. Crystal chandelier is cast soft light across damask tablecloths. The menu is written in French, though the chef is Italian, which Poirot considers an acceptable compromise between authenticity and pragmatism. The waiters move with the practiced silence of men who have learned that the absence of their presence is a form of excellence. On the first formal evening, Poirot is seated quite deliberately. He suspects at a table with all of the ship's most interesting passengers. The captain, a man named Hendricks, with the weathered face of someone who has negotiated with the Nile for 40 years, clearly has a sense of drama. Monsieur Poirot, Catherine Verellen says, her accent flattened by American education, but retaining a certain crisp quality. I understand you are the detective. The famous one, not famous, mademoiselle, Poirot replies, carefully situating his napkin on his lap. Merely thorough. Fame is the consolation prize of those whose work speaks imperfectly for itself. James laughs, a quick, bright sound with no depth behind it. I'd say solving the Duchess of Weatherby's diamonds and that business in the Turkish bath constitutes more than mere thoroughness. Poirot inclines his head graciously. You are well informed, Monsieur Rutherford. That is either the sign of an intelligent man or one with excessive leisure time. I have not yet determined which. Victor Strand leans forward, his fingers drumming once against the table, a gesture he repeats whenever he is about to say something that requires careful phrasing. I imagine murder cases are far more common in real life than people assume. Banal, even. Less psychology, more ordinary human weakness. You have experience with murder, Monsieur Strand? Only in business, Monsieur Poirot. We all kill each other in small ways. The financial variety rarely draws blood. Margaret Ashford sets down her fork with deliberate care. How fortunate for you that you have never witnessed the moment when an ordinary person becomes capable of the extraordinary. Her voice is smooth, but there is an edge beneath it, like glass beneath silk. I think that is what most people fail to understand about violence. It is not aberration. It is simply the final outcome of what was always present. Everyone at the table, there are 6 of them, for Edmund Price and Lucia and Gaston have also been seated among them. Pauses for a moment. The orchestra, playing softly in the corner, seems suddenly very loud. Lord Ashford touches his wife's hand briefly. It could be construed as affectionate. It could also be construed as restraint. You speak with conviction, madam, Poirot observes. Have you also witnessed the extraordinary become ordinary? Margaret meets his eyes. She is a beautiful woman in a way that is almost defiant, as if her beauty is a rebuttal to some criticism only she can hear. I have lived long enough to understand that the line between decent behavior and cruelty is much thinner than we would like to believe, Monsieur Poirot. And how long is that? Poirot asks gently. How long must one live to develop such perspicacity? Longer than some, not as long as others. The soup course arrives, and conversation fragments into smaller tributaries. But Poirot has heard something in that exchange, something like a confession spoken in the language of philosophy rather than admission later. when he excuses himself to the deck to smoke one of his occasional cigars and indulgence. He permits himself only after dinner. He finds Edmund Price leaning against the railing, staring at the Nile with the intensity of a man trying to read a message written in water. "You and Monsieur Strand are old friends?" Poirot inquires pleasantly. Edmund starts, as if he had not heard Poirot approach. The little detective moves with the surprising silence of a much smaller man, which is to say, a man with no mass to displace. "Business associates," Edmund corrects. "For 7 years now, a long partnership. That suggests either deep loyalty or deep compromise. Why must they be mutually exclusive?" Poirot smiles. "They are not. But in my experience, Monsieur Price, they rarely coexist equally. One of them is always the dominant partner in such arrangements." Edmund is quiet for a moment. He is a thin man in his early 50s, with the appearance of someone who was once athletic, but has allowed that athleticism to atrophy into an approximation of its former self. His hands are, Poirot notes, precisely the hands of a man whose business involves numbers and documents. They are the hands of precision. "Victor is the dominant partner," Edmund finally admits. "But I have not suffered for it. On the contrary," Poirot observes, "you are aboard this expensive vessel. You wear an expensive watch. Your shoes are English. Your tie is silk. Your suffering appears to be minimal. Then why do you ask?" "Because the human face, Monsieur Price, tells a different story than material possession. Your face suggests a man in considerable distress." Edmund looks away. "I am not the kind of man to burden strangers with my difficulties." "Admirable," Poirot says, "but ultimately futile. I am a detective, Monsieur Price. I am paid to observe what is not wished to be observed. The burden is already placed, whether you acknowledge it or not. I am merely reading a text that has already been written." When Edmund finally speaks, his voice is very quiet. "Victor made a promise he cannot keep. A promise to a woman. A promise that involves resources that may not exist as we have represented them." "Ah." Poirot nods slowly. "And this woman, she is aboard?" Edmund does not answer. He does not need to. The answer is written across his face in letters of genuine terror. Poirot returns to his cabin an hour later. He does not sleep immediately. Instead, he sits at his small desk and writes in his private notebook observations in a mixture of French and English, the shorthand of a man who thinks in multiple languages and has learned to capture truth in whatever form it presents itself. He writes, "The ship is a pressure cooker. Heat and confinement. Everyone aboard is running from something or toward something. But the vector is wrong. They are all moving in circles. And circles, I have learned, eventually bring you back to the place where you began. If you began in blood, you will end in blood." Outside his cabin, the Nile flows on. The moon rises over the water, and for a moment, everything is illuminated in silver. The deck, the water, the faces of the night watch. It is beautiful. It is also cold. The second night aboard the Cleopatra's Crown brings with it a peculiar restlessness. The heat has built throughout the day like a physical accumulation. Warm air pressing down from the sky, rising up from the water until it becomes almost a presence in itself. The passengers emerge after dinner seeking relief, wandering the deck in small clusters, their conversations fractured and strange in the way that conversations become when people are physically uncomfortable. Poirot has positioned himself in the smoking room with a tisane, not tea, but a specific infusion of herbs procured from Cairo's old Medina. When he overhears the first real argument, it comes from beyond the partial wall that separates the smoking room from the lounge. And while Poirot is not the sort of man to eavesdrop deliberately, he is also the sort of man to understand that privacy often speaks louder than discretion. "You cannot continue this charade indefinitely." Margaret Ashford's voice is sharp as broken glass. "Adrian will begin to understand, and when he does, I have already told you." James Rutherford's response is defensive. "This was supposed to be temporary. Catherine has means, yes, but she also has expectations. I cannot simply dissolve the arrangement like sugar in tea. You promised me, I promised you many things, Margaret, before you married him again, before you decided that security was preferable to honesty." There is silence. Then Margaret's voice, quieter but somehow more dangerous. "You do not understand the stakes, James. You have never understood them. You are a boy playing with forces you cannot comprehend. She leaves, her heels clicking sharply against the polished deck. James does not follow, but Poirot, sipping his tisane with the contemplative air of a man absorbed in his own thoughts, has heard everything. The conversation completes a circle that had been forming in Poirot's mind since dinner. The heiress and the lover, but also the lover and the wife of the aging lord. How elegantly the pieces fit together. How perfectly they would destroy each other if given the proper leverage later that evening. As the moon rises over the Nile full and enormous, turning the water into a mirror of itself, Poirot walks the upper deck. The heat has broken into something almost pleasant. A warm breeze that carries the scent of jasmine from the distant shore, and something else. Something like old copper, like blood, though it is only his imagination. Only his mind constructing meaning from randomness. He finds Victor Strand near the bow alone, smoking a cigarette with the violence of a man trying to exhaust something through sheer consumption. You cannot avoid your business difficulties by sailing toward them. Monsieur Strand, Poirot observes mildly. Victor does not seem surprised to see him. Does everyone on this ship wear their crisis like a name tag, or is it only obvious to you? I am trained in observation, but you are also not subtle, Monsieur Strand. You have been watching Monsieur Price with the intensity of a man attempting to determine whether his partner is planning betrayal. You have been watching Mademoiselle Varellon with the calculation of a man determining whether she is an asset or a liability. And you have been watching Lord Ashford with the wariness of a man, uncertain whether the gentleman has guessed certain truths about his wife's past. Victor flicks his cigarette overboard. It spirals down into the darkness and disappears. Past relationships are not crimes, Monsieur Poirot. No, Poirot agrees. But theft is. So is fraud. So is promising investors returns on ventures that exist primarily in imagination. Victor's jaw tightens. You are making accusations based on nothing. I am making observations based on everything. Poirot corrects gently. The quality of your suit suggests wealth. The way you wear it suggests anxiety. The two states are not typically compatible in a man of genuine means. A man with authentic wealth wears his suit without consciousness. You wear yours like armor. Armor is worn by those who expect siege. If that were true, Victor says carefully, then the logical conclusion would be that I am dangerous, that I should be avoided. Perhaps, Poirot admits, or perhaps it would mean that you are desperate. Desperation and danger are siblings, Monsieur Strand, but they are not always twins. One can exist without the other. And which do you believe I am? Poirot considers the question with genuine thought. The moon illuminates his small, precise features, the immaculate mustache, the observant eyes, the slight elevation of his chin that suggests confidence rather than arrogance. When he speaks, his voice is very soft. I believe, Monsieur Strand, that you are a man who made a series of decisions that seemed correct at the time, but which have now accumulated into a weight you cannot bear alone. I believe you have come aboard this ship because you hope to find a solution within these confined circumstances, and I believe you will not find it because the solution requires honesty, and honesty is something you surrendered a long time ago. Victor says nothing. He lights another cigarette and stares out at the Nile. Poirot returns to his cabin. He does not yet know that he is watching the final night of someone's life unfold around him, like a flower opening toward the sun. He does not yet know that by this time tomorrow, one of these carefully crafted personas will be stripped away, revealing something raw and irredeemable beneath. But his intuition whispers it to him. His intuition, which has rarely been wrong, suggests that the pressure that has been building throughout the ship is approaching a point of rupture, and when it ruptures, it will rupture catastrophically. He sits at his desk once more and writes a single sentence in his notebook. Tomorrow, someone will attempt to escape their fate. Instead, they will accomplish it perfectly. The night is not particular. It does not distinguish itself from any other night. The temperature drops as it always drops after midnight. The water sounds against the hull in its eternal rhythm. The crew makes their rounds with their flashlights, checking doors, ensuring that all is secure. Nothing seems ominous. Nothing seems predetermined. Catherine Varellon retires to her cabin at 11 o'clock. Her cabin is one of the ship's finest suites, the Dahlia, they call it. A sprawling compartment on the upper deck with a private sitting room and a view of the river. That would justify any price. She wears a nightgown of white silk and a matching robe. She takes her diamond earrings to carats each, family pieces, and places them carefully on the nightstand. She applies night cream to her face with the ritualistic precision of a woman who understands that beauty is work, that it must be maintained like a garden or it will deteriorate into wilderness. She reads for 20 minutes, a novel of no particular merit. She sets it aside at 11:30 and extinguishes the lamp at approximately 11:47. There's a soft knock on her cabin door. She rises, puts on her robe, and opens it. What transpires in the next 3 minutes, no one will ever entirely know. But at 11:50, James Rutherford is seen in the hallway outside her cabin. At 11:51, he is observed entering his own cabin, 3 doors down. At 11:52, the sound is heard, not loud, but distinct. The sound of a gunshot, sharp, final. The sound of a period being placed at the end of a sentence. The screaming begins almost immediately. It is Lucienne Gaston who first emerges from her cabin. She is followed quickly by her aunt, then Edmund Price, then Victor Strand, then Lord and Lady Ashford, then the ship's captain, then the stewards, then half of the crew. Summoned by the bell that is ringing continuously from the Dahlia suite, they find Catherine Verellen lying across her bed, her white nightgown transformed into a terrible red canvas. The wound is precise, a small hole just above her left collarbone. On the carpet beside her bed lies a pistol, a Walther semi-automatic, the barrel still warm. The cabin window is closed and locked from the inside. The door, when they forced it open, was unlocked. The body is still warm. The blood has not yet begun to darken. Death has occurred within the last moment. Poirot arrives last. He moves through the gathering crowd with a slow deliberateness, taking in details with the mechanical precision of a camera. The scattered jewelry on the nightstand, the novel left open on the chair, the nightgown and robe arranged in a way that suggests they were undressed by someone familiar, with the process of undressing quickly, efficiently, without the awkwardness of unfamiliar contact. He looks at the pistol for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turns to the captain. "No one leaves the ship," he says quietly. "This vessel becomes, for now, the entire world. The Nile will flow around us, but we do not flow with it. We remain here, suspended. Understood?" The captain, who has never been spoken to in such a way, nods automatically. The weapon, Poirot continues, will be touched by no one except myself. Mademoiselle Verellen will not be moved. This cabin will be sealed. No one will enter except under my direct supervision. James Rutherford is standing very still in the corner. His face is white, not pale, but genuinely white, drained of blood. He looks at Catherine's body with the expression of a man who has just understood that he has made an error from which there is no recovery. "Monsieur Rutherford," Poirot addresses him, "perhaps you would be so kind as to step with me into the corridor." They emerge into the hallway. The other passengers are clustered in small groups, their faces a study in shock and speculation. Margaret Ashford stands close to her husband, but not touching him. Victor Strand is already calculating something behind his eyes. Edmund Price looks like he might become physically ill. "Tell me, Monsieur Rutherford," Poirot says conversationally, "why you were observed outside Mademoiselle Verellen's cabin at 11:51. "I wasn't," James begins, then stops. He closes his eyes. When he opens them again, something in him has broken. "I went to see her. She had sent for me earlier in the evening. We argued. She said she had discovered something that changed her mind about our arrangement. I became angry. I told her she was being foolish. I left at 11:51. I suppose so. I didn't check my watch. And was Mademoiselle Verellen alive when you left?" "Of course she was alive. Do you think I—" He stops again. He looks back into the cabin where Catherine lies. "The door was open, you said. Unlocked." "It was. Then someone else came after me. Someone came after I left. Perhaps," Poirot says. "Or perhaps the timeline is not as straightforward as you believe. Come, Monsieur Rutherford. We will need to discuss this further. But not here. Not where the others can hear." As they pass through the corridor, Poirot catches sight of Margaret Ashford's face. She is looking at James with an expression of such pure anguish that for a moment, Poirot must look away. He understands. in that instant, a great deal about the nature of love and its capacity to destroy. The night has changed everything. The ship, which had seemed a place of leisure and luxury, has become a place of death, and the Nile, flowing past in the darkness, remains indifferent to human tragedy, has seen it all before, and will see it all again. For 10,000 years, for 10,000 more. By morning, the Cleopatra's crown has become a kind of floating island, cut off from the world by will rather than by geography. The captain has radioed ahead to Aswan, the next port, explaining the situation. The local police have been notified, but they will not arrive for at least another day. The river is long and Egypt is large, and bureaucracy, even in matters of murder, moves at a pace designed to frustrate the living. So the ship has anchored in the middle of the Nile, and its passengers have become, by necessity, a closed society. Poirot has taken over a small room off the main salon. It had been intended as a library, or perhaps a writing room, though it has remained largely unused. He has arranged it according to his specifications: a small table, 2 chairs, a notebook. By 7 o'clock in the morning, while most of the ship still sleeps with the uneasy sleep of the guilty or the traumatized, he begins his interviews. James Rutherford comes first, brought in by one of the ship's officers. He has not slept. His hair is disheveled in a way that suggests he has run his fingers through it repeatedly, the physical manifestation of mental disorder. He sits in the chair across from Poirot's desk and waits for the questioning to begin. "Let us establish facts," Poirot says, his fingers steepled before him. "You arrived aboard this ship 7 days ago. You arrived with Mademoiselle Varellin, with whom you were, I understand, in a romantic entanglement. Before boarding, were you aware that Mademoiselle Gaston would also be aboard?" "No," James says. "I had no idea until I saw her at the embarkation. And Mademoiselle Gaston knew, and she had been engaged. We were engaged 2 years ago, but she broke it off. She said she wanted to focus on her musical career, but the truth was she wanted to focus on someone else. She wanted to focus on you, Monsieur Poirot. If you can believe such a thing, she wanted a man of substance, not an actor mired in debt, and yet here you are, mired with Mademoiselle Varellin, who, I imagine, has proven equally demanding." James flinches. "Catherine wanted to marry me. She had marriage in mind from the beginning, but you did not. You wanted the money without the permanence of the commitment. I wanted—" James stops. He runs his hands over his face. "I wanted not to be ordinary. I've wanted that my entire life. I was raised middle class in Manchester. My father was an accountant. My mother taught piano. There was nothing wrong with this life, but there was also nothing transcendent about it. When you are born without beauty or talent or genuine intelligence, you learn that the only asset you truly possess is the ability to be wanted by people who are beautiful or talented or intelligent. I learned to cultivate that ability, and it has served you well." "Until it didn't," James says quietly. "Catherine loved me, Monsieur Poirot. I believe that, but her love was predicated on the assumption that I loved her in return. That assumption was incorrect. She discovered that last night. She discovered it when I was careless enough to allow her to understand that I had maintained a particular interest in Lucien, that seeing her aboard had reminded me of what it felt like to be actually loved, rather than to be simply wanted." And what did she say when she made this discovery? She said she would tell everyone. She said she would ensure that I never worked again, that I would be known as a fraudulent man who had tried to exploit her grief over her father's death. She said she had friends in London, in Paris, everywhere, and that she would make it her life's work to see me ruined. "Quite a threat," Poirot observes. "I left," James says. "I was angry. I was frightened. But I did not kill her. I want you to understand that. I could not have killed her. Could not, or did not? Either," James says. "Both. There's no difference." When James has been escorted out, Poirot sits alone for a moment, his small hands folded on the table before him. There is something in the young man's confession that rings with the quality of truth. But truth is not the same as innocence, and Poirot knows this better than most. A man can speak perfect truth and still be guilty. Truth is merely facts arranged in a sequence. Innocence is something more ineffable. Victor Strand enters next. He is wearing a suit that is even more expensive than the one he wore yesterday. if such a thing is possible. His mustache not as magnificent as Poirot's, nothing has been trimmed. He sits with the confidence of a man who has negotiated his way out of difficult situations. Before, I assume you know where I was last night, Victor begins. I know where you claim to have been. The claim and the reality may not be entirely aligned. I was in my cabin, asleep. By 11 o'clock, Edmund Price can verify this. He shares a cabin with me. Then Edmund Price would also be committing perjury, should he be called to testify. How convenient for you both. You think I killed Catherine. I think, Poirot says carefully, that you had a great deal to lose should certain facts about your financial situation have become known. I think that Mademoiselle Varellon was a woman of significant wealth who was boarding your ship. I think that if she had discovered the nature of your vulnerabilities, she might have chosen to remedy them. People in her position often do. I loved Catherine, Victor says. This is what everyone will think I'm lying about, but I am not. I loved her. Yet you were conducting an affair with her future stepmother? Victor's face goes still. That is not Margaret Ashford, Monsieur Strand. You have been seen in intimate conversation with her on multiple occasions. Your hand on her arm, her hand on your face. The body does not lie as easily as the mouth. That was it, was nothing. A moment of weakness. Catherine and I were already failing, and Margaret was. Margaret was kind. She understood what it was like to love someone who didn't quite love you back with equal measure. And what was it like, in Margaret's case? What did she not quite get back? Victor is quiet. Then, love, Monsieur Poirot, from her husband. Lord Ashford married her out of nostalgia and guilt, not out of love. She knew it. She was trying to find what was missing. In your arms, she hoped to find it. Perhaps, Victor admits, or perhaps she was simply trying to escape the knowledge that love, once lost, cannot be retrieved no matter how many times you attempt the recovery. Poirot dismisses him without another word. Edmund Price comes next. He is nervous in a way that suggests experience with anxiety. His fingers drum against the table. His eyes do not quite settle on Poirot's face. You and Monsieur Strand have been partners for 7 years, Poirot begins. In that time, you must have developed an acute sense of his character. Is he capable of murder? Everyone is capable of murder, given the proper circumstances, Edmund says carefully. That is philosophy, Monsieur Price. I am asking for personal testimony. Yes, Edmund finally says. Victor is capable of it. He is capable of anything when his existence is threatened. I have always known this about him. It is partly why we have been successful together. He is ruthless in a way that I am not. And yet you have shared a cabin with him. You have trusted him with your sleeping body, your unconscious mind. I have trusted him as one trusts a shark, Monsieur Poirot. One understands the danger, and one manages it. Last night I did not manage it well enough, because I was asleep and he was awake. Then you are claiming that Monsieur Strand left the cabin without your knowledge? Edmund nods slowly. I believe he did. I cannot prove it, but I believe it. And I believe he had a motive that I did not initially understand. Which is, Margaret, Edmund says quietly. He was in love with her. But Margaret would not abandon Lord Ashford unless Catherine was removed from the equation. Margaret is too moral for that. She would never be the catalyst for a marriage's dissolution. But if Catherine died and the inheritance passed to James, and if Lord Ashford suffered enough from the scandal of having his wife's lover aboard his ship, then perhaps the whole structure would collapse of its own weight, and Victor and Margaret could be together. Poirot absorbs this. It is a theory. It contains internal logic, but logic and guilt are not always aligned. Where is Monsieur Strand now? Poirot asks suddenly. I don't know, Edmund says. He left our cabin early this morning. He said he needed air. I assumed he was on deck. He is not on deck. When Poirot learns this, approximately an hour later, he understands that the situation has changed in ways that will require him to move more quickly. A guilty man running is often a man running toward evidence rather than away from it. A guilty man who is desperate might accomplish something dramatic in hopes of altering the narrative of his guilt. Poirot moves through the ship with the purposeful stride of a man who has suddenly grasped a thread of truth and is now pulling it to see what unravels. He finds Victor Strand in the engine room. The engine room is like descending into the belly of a great metal beast. Heat radiates from the furnaces. The machinery throbs with the pulse of industry. Oil and steam create an atmosphere that is almost liquid, almost alive. The workers for men in stained uniforms look up from their tasks, with the confusion of those interrupted during the business of the ordinary. Victor Strand stands beside one of the massive engines, a letter in his hand. His face is unreadable. When he sees Poirot, he does not attempt to hide. Instead, he holds up the letter. "I found this," Victor says, his voice barely audible above the industrial noise. "In Catherine's cabin. I took it this morning, before you sealed everything. I had to know. And what does it say?" Poirot asks, moving closer. Victor hands it to him. It is written in Catherine's precise hand, on her personal stationery cream-colored, embossed with her monogram. The letter is dated 3 days ago. "My dearest James, I have discovered the truth about your relationship with Margaret. I have known for 2 days and said nothing because I wanted to understand my own feelings first. What I have discovered is that I do not love you. What I love is the idea of being loved. I love the security of being wanted. But you have shown me that security is an illusion, and I find that I am relieved by its dissolution. I will be releasing you from our engagement tomorrow. I have already written to my father's solicitor to ensure that you receive nothing from my estate. I hope you will not take this personally. It is simply that I have decided to stop living someone else's story and begin living my own. With profound respect for what you taught me about the fragility of my own heart." Catherine Poirot reads this twice. Then he looks at Victor. "This letter provides you with motive, Monsieur Strand. Catherine was releasing James, which meant you were losing your financial advantage through him. If Catherine had discovered the full extent of your fraud, if she had decided to press charges, she didn't know." Victor interrupts. "The letter doesn't mention any financial impropriety. She only knew about James and Margaret. But you believed she would discover it?" "Yes," Victor admits. "It was only a matter of time. And I could not allow that. My firm, my reputation, Edmund's life, all of it would have been destroyed." Lord Ashford does not deny it. "I went to Catherine's cabin. I had received a note from her asking me to meet her privately. She said she had something important to tell me. And what was this something important? She told me that she knew about Margaret. Not about her being my illegitimate daughter, she did not know that. But she knew about Margaret's affair with James. She said she was concerned about Margaret's emotional state. She said she believed Margaret was becoming unstable, that she was capable of something desperate. And what did you say?" "I said that Margaret was none of her concern. I said that Margaret was my wife and that I would handle my own affairs." Catherine replied that she was afraid, that she felt genuinely concerned for my safety. That is when I realized, that is when I understood that Catherine was more intelligent than I had given her credit for. She was warning me that Margaret had become dangerous, and yet you did not take her warning seriously. I told her she was imagining things. I told her that grief had made her paranoid. I left her cabin at approximately 11:52. She was alive. Did you see anyone in the corridor as you left?" "No, the hallway was empty." Poirot studies him carefully. "Why did you accept Catherine's concern so readily? A man less generous might have dismissed it entirely." Lord Ashford sets down his drink. "Because I love Margaret, Monsieur Poirot. I have loved her since before she was born. I loved her mother with a ferocity that dominated my entire life. When Margaret came to me, when I realized who she was, it was like being granted a second chance. And I am a man who understands that second chances are rare and should never be wasted. So when Catherine suggested that Margaret was in distress, I believed her. And I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that I would lose her. Afraid that she would do something irreversible. Afraid that the secret of her birth would become public knowledge, and that she would hate me for the circumstances of her existence. Afraid that my love for her would be interpreted as something other than what it was: unconditional, absolute, and entirely paternal." Poirot nods slowly. "You are an honest man, Lord Ashford. Dishonesty, at least regarding the essential matters. Does honesty matter when everyone is guilty?" Lord Ashford asks quietly. "Margaret wanted to hurt me through James. James wanted to exploit Catherine through Margaret. Catherine wanted to expose the situation, to manage her own fear and insecurity. Victor wanted to manipulate all of them for profit. and I wanted to possess my daughter in a way that the law and society would not permit. We are all criminals, Monsieur Poirot. We have all done wrong. Does it matter who placed the bullet in Catherine's heart? Yes, Poirot says. It matters because murder is not the same as moral compromise. It is of a different order entirely. By evening, Poirot has gathered all of the passengers in the main salon. The ship is anchored in the same spot on the Nile. The sun is setting, turning the water into molten copper. The light through the portholes casts long shadows across the room. He stands before them, this small Belgian detective with his immaculate mustache and his theatrical manner, and begins to reconstruct the night. Let us consider, he says, what we know. Mademoiselle Varellon was shot at approximately 11:50 at night. The weapon was a Walther semi-automatic pistol, not part of the ship's official inventory, which means it was brought aboard by someone with intention to use it. The killer entered her cabin, fired a single shot, and left without being observed. The cabin window was closed and locked. The door was found unlocked. The last detail is crucial, Poirot continues. If the killer locked the door from the outside, they would require a key. If they did not lock it, then the door was left in a state that suggested the victim had locked and then unlocked it herself, which is to say, the victim was alive to open the door to her killer. Lucien Gaston makes a small sound, almost a gasp. Poirot acknowledges her with a nod. But there's another possibility, he says. What if the killer was never outside the door at all? What if they were inside the cabin already? What if they had hidden themselves hours before the murder occurred? Silence now. Complete, absolute silence. I have examined Mademoiselle Varellon's cabin very carefully. Poirot explains. There's a space beneath the bed, a considerable space where someone might hide, provided they were willing to remain absolutely still for hours. The dust on the floor shows evidence of disturbance in this area. Someone was beneath that bed. He pauses, allowing this to settle into their consciousness. And I have discovered something else, he continues. The letter that Mademoiselle Varellon wrote to Monsieur Rutherford. The letter that explained her decision to end their engagement was not completed in a single sitting. There are 3 distinct points where the pen was lifted and reapplied hours later. This tells me that Mademoiselle Varellon wrote this letter throughout the day. She revised her thoughts. She added to it. She did not write it in the evening as previously assumed. She wrote it in the afternoon. And that means he lets the implication hang in the air. That means she was not alone when she was writing. Margaret Ashford says quietly. Someone was watching her. Someone was reading her thoughts as she wrote them. Precisely, Poirot says. Mademoiselle Varellon had a visitor earlier in the day. This visitor saw what she was writing. This visitor understood that Catherine was preparing to expose a truth that would be devastating. And so this visitor made a decision. This visitor acquired a weapon that had been hidden aboard the ship beforehand, secreted in this very salon, and this visitor made a plan. He reaches into his jacket and withdraws a small object. It is a sapphire, brilliant blue, approximately the size of a thumbnail. This sapphire, Poirot says, was found beneath Mademoiselle Varellon's bed, mixed with the dust. It is not the kind of sapphire that one purchases in a jewelry store. It is cut and shaped in a very particular manner. It is the kind of sapphire that appears in one place specifically, in the signet ring of Lord Ashford. This ring bears 2 sapphires, positioned in a design that has been in his family for 200 years. One of these sapphires became loose. It fell, and when Lord Ashford attempted to retrieve it, he found something beneath the bed. Lord Ashford stands abruptly. I did not. You found a pistol beneath the bed. Poirot continues without listening. You found it at approximately 11:38 in the evening, when you went to Catherine's cabin to bid her good night, a habit you had developed since coming aboard the ship, a way of connecting with the daughter of the woman you loved. You discovered the pistol, and you understood immediately what it meant. Someone had placed it there. Someone had intended to use it against Catherine. But I did not fire it. Lord Ashford protests. No. Poirot agrees calmly. But you removed it. You took it from beneath the bed, intending to discover who had placed it there, intending to protect Catherine from harm. You left the cabin at 11:42, and in the moment you left Catherine vulnerable. Because the person who placed the pistol beneath the bed was not outside the room. They were inside it. They were in another room, the adjoining sitting room, connected to her bedroom by an internal door. Poirot turns now to face James Rutherford directly. You discovered that internal door weeks before boarding this ship, did you not? When you were with Catherine in London, she showed you this cabin. She was so excited about it, so proud that she had secured the finest suite. You saw the adjoining door. You realized what it could mean. And when you boarded the ship, you ensured that you were given the cabin on the other side of that door. You told the purser that you required that specific cabin due to a previous condition, a heart condition that required you to be on that particular part of the ship for the air circulation. The purser believed you. Everyone believed you. James stands as well, his face ashen. You cannot prove you hid the pistol beneath Catherine's bed yourself. Poirot continues, his voice dropping now to something almost conversational. You hid it there 2 days ago, during the afternoon when the cabin was empty. You hid it because you intended to murder her, but not immediately. You wanted her to suffer first. You wanted her to discover that she was in danger. You wanted her to be afraid. It was vengeance, but it was also seduction. You wanted her to beg for your help, to beg for your protection, to understand that she needed you despite all that had happened between you. This is madness, James says, but his voice has no conviction in it. Then we come to last night, Poirot says. You left your cabin at approximately 11:45. Walked through the internal door into Catherine's sitting room. You waited. You listened. You heard her moving about in her bedroom. And at 11:50, you entered. She was surprised to see you. She was confused. Why was he in her cabin? How had he entered? But before she could speak, before she could call for help, you shot her. One bullet. Precise, efficient. The work of a man who had practiced in his mind 1,000 times. I didn't, you did, Poirot says with certainty. And then Lord Ashford entered, having removed the pistol from beneath the bed at 11:38. He saw you standing over Catherine's body. He saw what had happened, and he made a choice. He chose to protect you. Or rather, he chose to protect the knowledge that his daughter had been killed by a man he had invited aboard his ship as a trusted family friend. No, Lord Ashford says quietly. No, I did not see anyone. I did not see James. I removed the pistol and I left. I swear to you, Monsieur Poirot. You swear to me, Poirot repeats. But swearing and truth are not always aligned, are they? You are a man who has lived a life of secrets, Lord Ashford. You have hidden your relationship to Margaret. You have hidden your love for Catherine's mother. You have hidden many things. Perhaps you have hidden this one thing as well. No, a new voice speaks. Lucienne Gaston has stood. She is very pale, but her voice is steady. Lord Ashford did not hide anything. I know where he was at 11:38. All eyes turned to her. I was in the corridor, Lucienne continues. I had gone to find James. I wanted to see him, to talk to him about the letters. I wanted to understand why he had carried them aboard. And I saw Lord Ashford leaving Catherine's cabin at 11:38. I saw him remove something from his pocket and put it down his jacket front. He looked frightened. He looked like a man who had just discovered something that would unmake him. And did you see him return to Catherine's cabin? Poirot asks gently. No, I did not. I was already walking away. I was walking back to my own cabin because I felt ashamed. I had been following James like a lovesick girl, like I was still the woman I was when I was 26 years old, and believed in the permanence of love. Thank you, mademoiselle, Poirot says. He turns back to James. Your crime was not crime of impulse, Monsieur Rutherford. Your crime was the product of calculation and fantasy. You believed that if Catherine died, her death would somehow undo your betrayal. You believed it would make you noble by contrast. But in fact, what it does is reveal the bankruptcy of your soul. James collapses back into his chair. He does not deny it. He cannot deny it. The architecture of his lie has been demolished, brick by brick, until there is nothing left but rubble. The police arrive at dawn the next morning, 2 officers, from a Swan and a senior inspector who has something of the air of a man who has encountered murder before and found it to be a tedious problem requiring paperwork. James Rutherford is placed in custody. The evidence is compiled. The case, from an official standpoint, is closed. But Poirot does not feel that the case is closed. He sits alone in his cabin as the morning light pours through the porthole, illuminating dust motes in the air like small stars. He considers the nature of truth and the nature of justice. He considers whether they are always the same thing. At 9 o'clock, he requests that all of the remaining passengers gather in the main salon for a final conversation. They come reluctantly, Lord and Lady Ashford, Margaret looking devastated, her husband looking remote, Victor Strand and Edmund Price, neither of them meeting the other's eye, Lucia and Gaston and her aunt, Captain Hendricks, still burdened by the weight of having his ship violated by murder. There is something I must say, Poirot begins, that is not technically relevant to the legal case against Monsieur Rutherford, but I believe it is relevant to all of you, and perhaps to the truth itself. He pauses, choosing his words with care. When I first came aboard this ship, I believed I was coming to rest. He continues, I believed I was coming to accept the simple pleasures of travel and the luxury of idleness. But what I discovered instead is that I cannot accept rest. My mind, it refuses. My intellect, it demands engagement. And so I investigated. I observed. I deduced. I revealed what was hidden. But what I have come to understand, in the aftermath of Mademoiselle Varellan's death, is that some of what is hidden was meant to remain so. Not because it is criminal in the legal sense, but because it is human. And the human heart, gentlemen and ladies, is not subject to law. He turns to Lord Ashford. You harbored a secret love for a woman you could not possess. You created a daughter out of that love. You spent your life torn between propriety and desire. This is not a crime. He turns to Margaret. You sought recognition from your father. You married him in the hopes that the law might recognize what biology had already established. You then betrayed him out of rage at his emotional unavailability. This is tragic, but it is not a crime. He turns to Victor and Edmund. You constructed lies regarding your finances. You promised returns that did not exist. You built a financial edifice on the foundations of fraud. This is a crime, and it will be prosecuted in the proper courts with the proper authorities. But it is not the crime that brought death to this ship. He turns to Lucien. You followed a man whom you had loved and whom you had lost. You hoped that by witnessing his present life, you might retrieve your past with him. This is the essence of human folly, and it breaks my heart to see it. But it is not a crime. Finally, he turns to James's empty chair. Monsieur Rutherford believed that he was the victim of circumstances beyond his control. He believed that he had been born without adequate resources, physical beauty, social position, inherited wealth, and he believed, therefore, that he was entitled to take what he could not earn. He believed his deception was justified. He believed his manipulation was permissible. And when those beliefs crashed against the reality of Catherine Varellan's mortality, when he was forced to confront the fact that his fantasies had destroyed an actual human being, he murdered her. But here is what I have come to understand, and I share this with you all, not as a detective, but as a man who has lived long enough to understand the architecture of human tragedy. Monsieur Rutherford was correct in one regard. He was a victim of circumstances. We are all victims of circumstances. We are all born into situations that are not of our choosing, into bodies we did not select, into families we did not construct. The question is not whether we are victims. The question is what we do with that victimhood. Monsieur Rutherford did violence to that victimhood. He transformed it into a weapon, and the weapon destroyed him as surely as it destroyed Catherine Varellan. The salon is silent. The Nile laps against the hull. Somewhere, a door closes with a soft click. The ship will depart for Aswan within the hour. Poirot announces, "You are all free to go ashore or to continue with us. But I hope that each of you will consider very carefully the life you are leading, the secrets you are keeping, the ways in which you are telling yourself stories about your own innocence." Hercule Poirot stands at the bow of the Cleopatra's Crown as it begins to move downriver. The moorings have been released. The engines have engaged. The ship glides forward slowly, inevitably, returning to its journey as if death were merely a brief detour from the essential business of tourism. The Nile is in flood season. The water is high and fast-moving. The river, which has seemed eternal and unchanging, is revealed to be in constant motion, always flowing, always moving toward some distant destination. never remaining in the same place twice. Margaret Ashford stands beside him. She has left Lord Ashford in their cabin. She has told him that she needs time to think, to understand what she wants, to separate the woman she has become from the daughter she was always meant to be. "Do you believe in redemption, Monsieur Poirot?" she asks quietly. "I believe in it as a concept," he replies. "As a practical matter, I am less certain. Redemption requires that one fully understand and accept the nature of one's guilt. Most people cannot do this. Most people convince themselves that their guilt is mitigated by circumstances or necessity, or the prior wrongs committed against them. And can guilt be mitigated by those things? Morally, Poirot considers this. Perhaps legally, never. The law does not care why you did what you did. The law only cares that you did it. The law is simpler than morality, and therefore purer. It is also colder. Margaret looks at him with an intensity that suggests she is asking a question far more personal than the one she has spoken. "Is that what you think of me? That I am cold? I think you are frightened," Poirot says gently. Fear masquerades as so many other things. It masquerades as coldness. It masquerades as cruelty. It masquerades as logic. But beneath all of it is simply fear, the fear that you are not enough, that you do not deserve what you have been given, that you will lose it all if you are not constantly vigilant. Margaret does not respond. She simply stands beside him and watches the river flow. Later, as sunset approaches, Poirot encounters Victor Strand. The financier is packing. He is leaving the ship at the next port. The legal consequences of his fraud will follow him, but at least he will not have the additional burden of being a murder suspect. "You saved me," Victor says. "Your investigation revealed that I was not the killer. For that I am grateful. I did not save you," Poirot replies. "I merely refuse to allow your guilt in one matter to condemn you in another. You are guilty of fraud, Monsieur Strand. You will answer for that. But you are innocent of murder. These are not the same thing. Does it matter? I will be destroyed regardless. My business will collapse. My reputation is ruined." "Yes," Poirot agrees. "You will suffer. This is justice. This is what happens when one constructs one's life on foundations of lies. But at least you will have the knowledge that your suffering is deserved. There is a kind of peace in that. There is the possibility, if you choose it, of building something new on truthful ground." Edmund Price appears then, luggage in hand, ready to follow his former partner away from this ship and the associations it now carries. The two men have made an arrangement. They will remain business partners, but they will disband the investment firm, return funds where possible, cooperate fully with the authorities. It is not redemption, but it is a beginning of something like honesty. As they pass Poirot, Edmund says, "Thank you for not destroying us completely. We deserved it, but thank you for your restraint." "I did not exercise restraint," Poirot tells him. "I exercised precision. I revealed exactly what was true and nothing more. My role is not to destroy people. My role is to reveal what they have already destroyed through their own actions. If I had revealed less, I would have been complicit in their deception. If I had revealed more, I would have been cruel in the fashion of a man who enjoyed cruelty. I revealed precisely what was necessary. The judgment is yours now. The consequences will be yours." The sun sets over the Nile. It sinks like a stone into water, trailing colors behind it, crimson and gold and a purple that seems almost supernatural in its intensity. The light lasts for perhaps 5 minutes after the sun itself has disappeared below the horizon. Then the darkness comes, sudden and complete. Poirot remains at the bow. He does not go to dinner. He does not retire to his cabin. Instead, he stands in the darkness and contemplates the nature of his profession. He has solved the mystery. He has revealed the truth. James Rutherford will face trial. James Rutherford will very likely face execution. The murder was premeditated, calculated, executed with cold precision. Justice, in its legal form, will be served. But Poirot understands something that the law does not, that James Rutherford's execution will not undo Catherine Verellen's death. That knowledge of the truth will not comfort the people left behind. That the revelation of guilt does not produce healing. It merely produces a different kind of pain. He thinks about the first time he encountered a murder. It was 40 years ago, in Belgium. A man had poisoned his wife. Poirot had solved it. Poirot had revealed the truth, and the man had hung for his crime. But the man's children had lived with the knowledge that their father was a murderer. The man's friends had lived with the knowledge that their judgment of character was fallible. The truth had rippled outward, destroying things the truth was never intended to destroy. And yet, what was the alternative? To hide the truth, to allow the lie to become the foundational narrative, to permit injustice to calcify into permanence? No, there was no acceptable alternative. The truth, however painful, was the only path available to a man who had devoted his life to the pursuit of it. Lucien Gaston finds him there as the stars emerge. She is dressed in a simple dark dress, and her hair is unbound, falling in waves down her back. She looks younger than she did in daylight. Or perhaps she merely looks more like herself, less performed, less constructed. "I wanted to thank you," she says, standing beside him at the railing, "for understanding that I was not guilty of anything except vulnerability." "Vulnerability is not guilt," Poirot replies. "It is merely the condition of being human. You followed a man because you loved him. This is foolish, perhaps, but it is not criminal. Do not mistake shame for culpability. Mademoiselle, will you stay on the ship?" she asks, "or will you leave at Aswan?" "I will continue to Cairo," Poirot says. "I will return to the place I began. I have found that journeys often work in circles rather than lines. We depart from a place, we travel outward, and eventually we return to where we started. But we never return exactly the same. We are changed by what we have witnessed. What will you do when you return to Cairo?" Poirot considers this question carefully. "I will write a report for the Egyptian authorities. I will ensure that the legal machinery grinds forward correctly. I will attend the trial, should I be called to testify, and then I will retire. Perhaps permanently. I have solved murders for 43 years. Perhaps it is time to permit others to solve them. Perhaps it is time to permit myself to simply exist, without constantly decoding the behavior of others. Do you think you can do that?" Lucien asks. "Can you simply exist?" "No," Poirot admits with a small smile. "I do not believe I can. I will retire, and within a week I will find myself investigating some minor corruption in a Cairo hotel. Within a month I will be engaged in solving a theft that no one else can solve. This is my nature. I cannot change it any more than I can change the color of my mustache, and I would not, as it is the most magnificent mustache in the Mediterranean." Lucien laughs a genuine laugh, without the performance of it. "You are vain, Monsieur Poirot." "Profoundly," he agrees. "But my vanity is the vanity of an honest man. I know precisely what I am: small, methodical, concerned primarily with my own comfort and the precise arrangement of my own thoughts. I do not pretend to be otherwise. This is something James Rutherford could never understand. He spent his life pretending to be other than what he was. This pretense eventually destroyed him. My vanity saves me." They stand in silence for a moment. The Nile flows beneath them, carrying the ship forward. Other ships pass in the opposite direction, their lights reflecting on the water-like stars that have fallen from the sky. "Do you believe," Lucien asks, "that Catherine Verellen's death was inevitable? That it could not have been prevented?" Poirot does not answer immediately. He contemplates the question with the seriousness it deserves. "I believe," he finally says, "that Catherine Verellen was a young woman of considerable wealth and considerable naivete. She believed that money could purchase whatever she needed: love, security, happiness. She did not understand that these things cannot be purchased. They must be earned or given freely. She hired James Rutherford because she believed his beauty and charm could be purchased for the price of his presence. She was correct that they could be. She was incorrect in believing that this would satisfy her. Nothing purchased in that fashion ever does, so her death was inevitable. Her suffering was inevitable," Poirot corrects. "Whether that suffering would have culminated in death is unknowable. James Rutherford chose to murder her. He made that choice, but the conditions that led to that choice, the desperation, the shame, the rage at his own worthlessness, these conditions were created by Catherine's own actions. She created the very weapon that destroyed her. This does not justify his act. It merely complicates our understanding of causality." Lucien leaves him then, returning to her cabin to pack for the departure at Aswan. Poirot remains at the bow, watching the night river flow past. He thinks about James Rutherford, sitting in a holding cell awaiting trial. He thinks about what James must be experiencing, the collapse of all pretense, the revelation of all his schemes, the knowledge that he will very likely die for what he has done. But he also thinks about Catherine Verellen, who is dead and will not wake to see the morning. He thinks about Lord Ashford, who has lost the daughter of the woman he loved, and who may lose the wife he remarried out of desperation. He thinks about Margaret Ashford, who is discovering that being acknowledged as her father's daughter does not fill the void that fatherly love should have filled. He thinks about Victor Strand and Edmund Price, facing legal consequences and social ruin. He thinks about Lucien Gaston, who came aboard the ship hoping to glimpse a past that was already irretrievably lost. All of them have been changed by Catherine's death. All of them carry it with them now, in various ways. The murder has become a kind of infection, spreading through the ship, infecting everyone aboard with the knowledge of human capacity for violence. And Hercule Poirot, that fastidious, brilliant detective, understands that this is the true cost of his profession. It is not that he solves murders. It is that he reveals them. He brings to light what was hidden. And once something has been brought to light, it cannot again be hidden. The darkness that preceded the revelation cannot be recovered. The Cleopatra's crown arrives in a swan on the morning of the 4th day after the murder. The sky is cloudless and brilliant. The temperature is already climbing toward unbearable. The wharf is crowded with Egyptian workers, tourists, and officials. Victor Strand and Edmund Price disembark first, their luggage loaded onto a motor car that will take them to the railway station. They do not speak to anyone. They simply leave, erasing themselves from the narrative of the ship, carrying their own narrative away with them. Lucien Gaston and her aunt follow. Lucien embraces Poirot briefly before departing. "I will try," she says, "to stop looking backward. I will try to look forward instead. That is all any of us can do," Poirot tells her. The ship will remain in a swan for 2 days, ostensibly for supplies and routine maintenance. In reality, it is waiting for the trial proceedings to conclude. James Rutherford is taken from the holding cell to the magistrate's court. The evidence is presented: the pistol, the letter, the testimony of Lucien Gaston regarding the timeline, Poirot's own careful reconstruction of events. James does not maintain his innocence. Instead, he delivers a statement that is part confession, part lament. He speaks about his childhood in Manchester. He speaks about his father's disappointment in him, his mother's unrealistic hopes. He speaks about the moment, at age 23, when he first understood that beauty was the only currency he possessed, and that it was a currency with a very short shelf life. "I did what I had to do," James tells the court. "I became what I needed to be to survive. I learned to read people. I learned to understand what they wanted and to provide it. I became a mirror. I reflected back their desires until they could not distinguish between what they wanted and what I actually was." And then he continues, his voice breaking slightly, "I killed someone. I murdered a woman who had shown me only kindness. And in that moment, in the moment I fired that weapon, I finally discovered something real about myself. I discovered that I was not a mirror. I was a weapon. And weapons are meant to be destroyed when they are no longer useful." He is convicted. The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out within 3 months, pending any appeal. James accepts the sentence without protest. He seems, in fact, relieved by it, as if the weight of pretense has finally been lifted, and there is comfort and simple, unambiguous truth. Poirot does not attend the trial. He does not believe in the theatrical aspect of justice. He has provided his information. He has answered the questions posed to him. The rest is not his concern. He remains aboard the ship and completes his report. On the morning of the 3rd day in a swan, he encounters Lord and Lady Ashford on the deck. They are standing together but not together, standing in proximity but not in connection. The distance between them is not spatial but emotional. "We are leaving," Lord Ashford says. "We will return to London separately. Margaret will accompany her aunt. I will travel alone. We have decided that what we did was based on fantasy rather than reality. We married each other again because we wanted to recover something that was lost. But what was lost cannot be recovered. One can only move forward. This is wisdom," Poirot observes. "It is difficult wisdom, and it costs you both greatly. But it is wisdom nonetheless. Margaret says nothing. She merely looks at Poirot with eyes that suggest she has aged 10 years in the course of her days. The knowledge of her paternity, which she had sought so desperately, has proven to be a burden rather than a gift. She has learned that being acknowledged as someone's child does not provide the love she craved. It only provides the knowledge that her parent loves the person she is not, and has never loved the person she actually is. Will you testify at the trial? Lord Ashford asks. When Monsieur Rutherford appeals, if I am called, Poirot says, but I do not believe there will be an appeal. Monsieur Rutherford appears to have made peace with his fate. He wishes to be punished. Punishment has become his confession and his redemption combined. Do you believe he can be redeemed? Margaret asks quietly. Poirot considers this carefully. I believe that redemption is a category error when applied to murder. One does not redeem murder. One accepts responsibility for it. One suffers the consequences of it. And perhaps in that acceptance and suffering, one discovers something like grace. But it is not the same as redemption. Redemption suggests a return to innocence. Innocence, once lost, is lost forever. Lord and Lady Ashford depart an hour later. They board a motor car that will take them to the railway station. They will travel separately, as they have said. They will return to London as to individuals rather than as a couple. It is the beginning, perhaps, of a new kind of honesty between them, the honesty that comes from accepting that one cannot recover the past, and that attempting to do so only creates new tragedies. The Cleopatra's Crown departs a swan on the morning of the 4th day. Its hold is lighter now, for passengers have disembarked, leaving only the remaining tourists, who know nothing of the murder and will never know. To them, it was simply an extended delay for undefined reasons. To them, the ship is merely a vessel for pleasure, for the acquisition of photographs and memories to be shared with friends back home. Poirot stands at the bow as the ship casts off. The Nile is behind them now, to the north. They are traveling with the current, moving toward Cairo, moving toward the conclusion of this journey that began with such promise and such naivete. He removes his notebook from his jacket and writes a final entry. The page is dated with the current date, and beneath it he writes, "The case of Catherine Verellen is concluded. A murderer has been apprehended. Justice has been served in its legal fashion. And yet I find myself dissatisfied with the conclusion, not because the guilty party remains free, he does not, but because the guilty party is not singular. James Rutherford murdered with a weapon and with premeditation, but Catherine Verellen was murdered by her own ignorance, by her own wealth, by her own belief that money could purchase what only love can provide. She was murdered by Lord Ashford's weakness, by Margaret Ashford's desperation, by Victor Strand's fraud, by Edmund Price's complicity, by Lucien Gaston's desire for a past that could never be recovered. We are all guilty. We are all innocent. The distinction between these states is more fragile than we wish to believe. A man may commit murder and still possess the capacity for remorse. A woman may live a life of virtue and still harbor the desire for vengeance. Human nature is not binary. It is infinitely complex, infinitely contradictory, infinitely tragic. I have spent my life resolving contradictions. I have attempted to reduce the chaos of human behavior to rules that can be applied universally. But perhaps I have been mistaken. Perhaps the rules do not apply. Perhaps there is only behavior, only consequence, only the endless flowing of the river and the small humans clinging to its banks, believing themselves to be in control of their destinies. I am tired. I wish to retire. But I fear that retirement will prove impossible for a man whose mind has been trained to constantly seek patterns, constantly demand resolution, constantly refuse to accept that some chaos is simply chaos and does not require explanation. He closes the notebook and places it in his jacket. The sun is rising over the Egyptian desert. The heat is building. The Nile flows northward, indifferent to human drama, carrying the ship and its passengers toward Cairo and whatever futures await them there. Poirot descends from the bow and makes his way to the dining room. He orders his breakfast fruit, toast with marmalade, tea without sugar. He eats methodically, thinking about nothing in particular. He has learned that it is sometimes possible to empty one's mind entirely. and that this emptiness is a kind of luxury that few people permit themselves to experience. After breakfast, he retires to his cabin and packs his belongings. He has been aboard the ship for less than a week, and yet it feels as if he has been aboard for a lifetime. Trauma and discovery have a way of expanding time, making moments seem like hours, making days seem like weeks. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the ship arrives in Cairo. The port is chaotic, ships arriving and departing, workers loading and unloading cargo, tourists and merchants creating a controlled pandemonium that suggests the city itself is a living organism with its own metabolism and its own rhythms. Poirot disembarks with his luggage and makes his way to the hotel where he had resided before boarding the ship. It is a small establishment, elegant but not ostentatious, run by a French woman named Margot, who understands the particular requirements of a man who has spent his life in pursuit of order and precision. "Monsieur Poirot," Margot greets him. "I hope the ship was pleasant." "It was complicated," Poirot replies. "But life, madam, is always complicated. Simplicity is a luxury reserved for the very young and the very old, and they do not truly understand it when they possess it." He retires to his room and, for the first time in 4 days, he permits himself to rest without thinking, without analyzing, without demanding meaning from chaos. Hercule Poirot receives a letter from London. It is from Margaret Ashford. In it, she describes her life in the interim 6 months. She has left England and moved to Paris, where she has begun studying music composition. She writes, "I have come to understand that my father could never love me the way I wished to be loved, because he was in love with someone else, someone I could never be. This realization, which was initially devastating, has proven to be liberating. It freed me from the burden of attempting to become someone I was not. I am now learning to love myself as I actually am, rather than waiting for someone else to do so. This is slower work, and it is more painful in its way, but it is also more honest." Victor Strand writes as well. His letter is briefer. He has served his legal sentence for fraud. He has been released and is working as an accountant for a modest firm. He writes, "I believe I am becoming a better man. Not good, I do not expect to become good, but better. Incremental improvements. It is perhaps all one can ask." James Rutherford's execution is carried out on a grey morning in London. The newspapers report it briefly: a wealthy heiress murdered by her lover. A crime of passion. A tragic waste. Within a week, the story is replaced by other news, other scandals, other tragedies. The public memory is short, and human nature is forgiving of the dead if not of the living. Poirot learns of James's death through a brief newspaper article forwarded to him by his solicitor. He does not attend the execution. He does not believe in bearing witness to death in that fashion. He simply accepts the fact of it and moves forward. He spends the remainder of the year in Cairo, taking only small cases, a theft here, a fraud there, nothing requiring the full deployment of his intellect. He is gradually, almost imperceptibly, winding down the machinery of his professional life. He is preparing himself for retirement, though he suspects he will never truly retire. On the first anniversary of Catherine Verellen's death, Poirot takes a small motorcar to the Nile. He does not board a ship. Instead, he simply stands on the bank and watches the water flow past. The river is eternal. It was here before Catherine was born. It will be here after everyone aboard the Cleopatra's Crown is dead and forgotten. There's something comforting in this thought. There's something peaceful in the understanding that one's small dramas are insignificant in the context of geological time and hydrological cycles. There's something liberating in the knowledge that one's guilt, one's responsibility, one's suffering, all of it will eventually be washed away by the indifferent flow of eternity. Poirot returns to his hotel as the sun sets. He sits at a table overlooking Cairo. He takes out his notebook and writes a final entry regarding the case of Catherine Verellen. It is done. Justice has been served. The guilty have been punished according to the law. The innocents have learned to live with their knowledge of human frailty. The river continues to flow. Time continues to pass. And I continue to exist, carrying within me the weight of all the secrets I have revealed and all the truths I have spoken. Perhaps this is enough. Perhaps this must be enough. Perhaps, after all, The role of the detective is not to make the world just or to make the human heart comprehensible, or to provide meaning to tragedy. Perhaps the role of the detective is simply to reveal what is hidden, and then to accept the consequences of that revelation. I have done this. I have done it well, and now I will rest, or as close to rest as a man like me can come. I will wait for the next case, the next mystery, the next invitation to illuminate the darkness. But I will do so without the urgency of my youth, without the conviction that truth must be pursued at any cost. I understand now that truth has a cost. The cost is borne by everyone, and sometimes the cost exceeds the value of the truth itself. But the alternative is to permit lies to calcify into permanence, and that I cannot accept. Hercule Poirot, Cairo, 1 year after the death of Catherine Verelinha, closes the notebook. He sets it aside. He never writes about this case again. But sometimes, late at night, he stands on the banks of the Nile and thinks about Catherine Verellen, who died believing that wealth could purchase love. He thinks about James Rutherford, who died believing that beauty could purchase acceptance. He thinks about all the passengers aboard the Cleopatra's Crown, each carrying their own desperate beliefs about what could be purchased, what could be recovered, what could be made permanent in an impermanent world. And he thinks about the river, flowing on regardless, carrying the ship that carried them all, moving toward the sea, moving toward dissolution, moving toward the vast indifference of eternity. This is the nature of his world. This is the substance of his knowledge, and this is the price he has paid for understanding it.